What a me. Hello, and welcome to this April edition of the Australia-New Zealand Women's Declaration International webinar. My name is Janet Fraser. I'm the convener of the Feminist Legal Clinic in Exile. Our principal solicitor, Anna Kerr, is doing tech. I live and work on Gundungurra and Nurra. Wherever you're coming from this evening, we pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations across the continent and any First Nations women joining us tonight. We want to acknowledge that many of us have experienced some tension in our feminist spaces lately after a tumultuous few months, and as the threat from transactivism looms greater than ever. We thank all the women here in advance for helping us keep this space constructive, thoughtful and focused above all on the main game, which is women's liberation. We have three speakers tonight whom I'll introduce in turn. A reminder that the presentation is recorded and question time is not. And now to introduce our excellent panel. Pearl Moon was born in New Zealand in 1959 and is the eldest of three daughters from a working class family. Her family was highly dysfunctional, with domestic violence, alcoholism and sexual abuse scarring hers and her sister's childhood. She had a son as a single mother in 1979 and gave up a second son into an illegal adoption in 1981. In 1986, she moved to Australia. With a trade certificate from Auckland Technical Institute, she worked from home as a sewing out worker until the work dried up in the 1990s with the offshoring to Asia of the clothing manufacturing industry. At that time, she was in her 30s, still a single mother, and with no work training outside of sewing. In desperation, she turned to working in the sex industry between 1992 and 98. In 2000, she started a visual arts degree at the University of Newcastle, but dropped out after 18 months. She then discovered she was on the autistic spectrum, which explained a lifetime of anxiety, social challenges, and obsessive thought patterns. Throughout the 2000s and until the present, she's developed a modest public profile as a textile artist. Meeting and marrying her husband in 2008 gave her the stable home life and environment she's needed to devote herself to making art. Tania Sturt lives in the Wairarapa region of Aotearoa, New Zealand. She has been involved in activism for about 7 years and been involved in most of the gender critical groups at one point or another. She is currently running Women Act Up, which is a Facebook group focusing on coordinating and reporting on the street activism going on in New Zealand. Tania had a work career in corrections, something completely the opposite in the private sector, and currently works in social services. Leah Whiston lives in Brisbane, Meanjin. She is originally from the UK, moving to Australia in 2019. She is a mother of a beautiful 1-year-old girl and is extremely concerned about the impacts of gender ideology on women's rights and children's safeguards. Around a year ago, she attended her first street rally organised by RWD Brisbane Meanjin. Since then, she's been following the changes to the Births, Deaths and Marriages Act, the new hate speech laws, and has been spreading the word about what's going on. She was one of the organisers of Kelly J. Keen's recent Australian Standing for Women tour. Now she organises Speakers Corner events, hoping to reach women and men who feel like they need to come and speak about what's happening or come and support others. She's met many women whose lives have been damaged by this insidious cult. Women cancelled, fired, kicked out of their sports teams, women whose children have been irreversibly harmed. She's also part of other groups in Brisbane, which hold regular meetings and discussion groups, make signs and write submissions and more. She's lost quite a few friends over her activism in this area. She never thought of herself as an activist. She naively thought there wasn't much to fight for. But on the issue of gender ideology, once she realised the extent of it, she simply couldn't look the other way and pretend it wasn't happening. And we are grateful. So welcome, everybody. And now I would like to pass the floor to Pearl. Pearl, please.
Hello, everybody. Good evening. I'm reading to you lying down tonight. A couple of days ago, I had an emergency operation to remove my gallbladder, so I've got some abdominal discomfort. This is my address. It is completely surreal to me that I've been asked to address WDI that I should be here stating that the species Homo sapiens are a dimorphic reproducing mammal consisting of male and female types that must combine genetic material to reproduce. It's so incomprehensible to me that I should be saying this anywhere, let alone to a women's rights organisation that I knew nothing of until recently. The absurdity of this literally challenges my hope that I live in a sane world that has a confident grip on reality. In our current dystopia, we're told everything is racist, everything is transphobic, and in seeking to make sense of the rise of this style of unhinged from reality thought being promulgated on the left, I began following the American philosopher and social commentator James Lindsay. This is a quote from his 2022 lecture called The Negation of the Real, which sums up the way I've come to view critical social justice and how its activists operate. Quote, if you want to impose a totalitarian system, you have a problem on your hands, reality. The real is in your way and will eventually veto your project. Far sooner, people who can perceive reality will step in and prevent you from taking society over a cliff. Therefore, the only way to install a totalitarian system is to negate the real in the minds of those over whom you would rule. This is accomplished by creating an interpretive frame that deliberately causes people to misunderstand reality, sometimes called a second reality or pseudo-reality or even a hyper-reality, which loses all contact with reality through its images and constructions. Unquote. In the remainder of this talk, I'll discuss mostly my own personal situation in dealing with the incursion, dissonance, and demands of living with transgender ideology, which has brought me to the place of agreeing with James Lindsay that the ultimate agenda of critical social justice and trans ideology is to install a totalitarian system of government committed to the eternal struggle of trying to install a postmodernist Marxist-type utopian society. I was kindly invited to give this presentation to WDI by a member of your group after she heard me talk at Kelly J. Keen's Let Women Speak rally in Sydney, Australia on March the 11th, 2023. In that speech, I outlined how I'd learned what transgender ideology is and how it expects to position itself in our societies. What I'm witnessing happening in my country and the rest of the West, starting for me in 2017, has caused me such alarm and anxiety that I feel compelled to try to speak out and find out what other people think. I am a textile artist and use my skills to make interesting things out of cloth. In that capacity, in 2017, I had gotten into trouble with an American social justice activist who denounced me as a racist because I refused to stop using the word kimono to describe a woman's loose robe. I not only refused to stop using it, but I stridently denied my using it was evidence of cultural appropriation. The kimono kerfuffle was my first step into the bizarro world of critical social justice activism, where I discovered a parallel universe populated by perpetually aggrieved and outraged people who sincerely believe that all the sufferings and oppressions of societies are intentionally caused by privileged people who engineer the situation that some people are denied rights and opportunities to keep one group more powerful than the other. I went on to discover that far from being oppressed and powerless, the cohort of critical social justice warriors that I had locked horns with in my textile artist world were highly successful in getting me censored, deplatformed, and cancelled all over social media. There was obviously some sort of black ban list going on, as it became commonplace for me to find I was blocked in advance of trying to follow various Instagram accounts. 6 years ago, when I endured this first wave of cancellation, my Instagram account had less than 300 followers. And the two social justice activists, Emily Ito and Arja Baba, who were the people working hardest to completely obliterate my presence on social media, had combined followings of more than 250,000. There was a pretty obvious power differential in there, regardless that the women believe that their racial identities as African American and American Japanese cause them to live lives with less equality to me because I have white skin. The reality is they are both far more educated, wealthy, and influential than I am or ever could be, but they felt their self-described social justice advocacy was justified in intending to crush a woman who had annoyed them by disagreeing with their opinions. I believe their actions against me were quite simply bullying and persecution, and were fueled by racial prejudice towards white people and had nothing to do with social justice. The consequences for me were having a barrage of nasty, personally denigrating emails and having my micro-internet enterprise lose significant income. These women and other so-called anti-racists keep monitoring what I do so that in 2021, an art gallery I was going to exhibit work in received written requests that I should not be represented by them due to my reputation as a racist. In December 2022, I was expelled from an arts organisation, the Surface Design Association, after I complained about being removed from an international Zoom meeting discussing cultural appropriation, in which Emily Ito was an invited speaker. Their justification in expelling me was described as incompatible values. Please note that Emily Ito is not any sort of an artist, nor has any education in art theory, history, sociology, or critique. The Surface Design Association asked her to expound her opinions from the perspective of an anti-racist social justice activist about what she thought textiles artists should be allowed to make. Weeks after the live interactive Zoom presentation, when I was able to track down and see a recording of it, it was no surprise to discover that Ito believes that cultural appropriation is rampant and done almost exclusively by white privileged racists. Up until speaking at Let Women Speak, I had been blocked from about 100 Instagram accounts, banned from social media posting to a magazine I had a paid subscription to. I was removed from Patreon, banned from prominent Australian feminist Bree Lee's Substack, banned from TikTok, shadow banned on Instagram for 10 months. Various postings were arbitrarily removed, and I was not allowed to start a business account with them due to what they described as repeated violations of community guidelines. I have my merchant shop closed on Pinterest. A whole board called Gender Critical with 500 links was removed from Pinterest. And of course, it virtually goes without saying that I have been banned from Twitter. It is chilling that privately owned social media companies feel entitled to censor users who publish opinions that don't do or say anything illegal. None of the videos or journalistic items I collected on my Pinterest board have been banned or removed elsewhere and can still be searched out. Everything is freely available on the internet and didn't contain anything illegal. My online store didn't get cancelled because of any problem with my products. It was removed because Pinterest did not like my political views. 2 days after I attended the Canberra Let Women Speak rally, my Instagram and Facebook platforms were hacked, and I have been denied access to them ever since. Meta does not respond to requests for help, so after a couple of weeks, I just deleted the apps from my devices and don't use them anymore. Not being able to use these platforms makes it extremely difficult to establish or develop a public profile as an artist. Being denied means to show my art production and talk about my practice on social media has almost the same effect as being sacked from a job. Despite the various cancellings, censorings, and shadow bannings I'd gotten on Instagram over 6 years, I'd still managed to accumulate 965 followers until my account was hijacked. Having this number of followers was a significant way helping promote my exhibitions and selling my art and handmade products in my Etsy shop. Having a social media profile with a good number of followers is an important factor in getting accepted to show in galleries or to sell at curated artisan markets, because the managers, organisers and curators could see I not only had established a reputation for quality and consistent production, but had an audience that their event or venue could be directly advertised to. At present, and going into the foreseeable future, I contend it will be impossible for anybody seeking to make a living as an artist to make a success of it if they are shut out of access to social media. A visual artist who cannot show anybody what they make cannot build credibility. Having no profile on social media means no attention, no potential to construct a narrative about your art practice, and you might as well not exist. In her 2022 Rees lecture, the writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie warned, "This new social censor demands consensus while being willfully blind to its own tyranny." I think it portends the death of curiosity, the death of learning, and the death of creativity. Being able to gatekeep who has access to social media is not only an ideological control, being banished from it can be existential for some types of users. Creators and artisans like myself, who are essentially self-employed, depend on social media platforms to be able to promote our work and maintain a public history about our art production. So why is a 64-year-old grandmother being told what she can and can't say in public? As a citizen of Australia, I'm in the most law-abiding demographic segment of the population who are least likely to cause public nuisance or commit offences. Now it seems my opinions and words have become so dangerous, I must be silenced. It is with the intention of silencing me that some ideologues I know, and others who are faceless, most of whom live half a world away, are working on a daily basis, generating algorithms to moderate and expunge what I'm allowed to say in the internet public square. Or they are making blacklists to be disseminated, or writing materials condemning those of us who don't identify as woke, and slurring us as racists, white supremacists, transphobes, homophobes, Nazis, and bigoted speakers of hate speech. Why do self-appointed social justice warriors feel the need to surveil and control others if the words we express our opinions in aren't anything that breaks the laws of our countries? The cancelling and deplatforming that increasing numbers of people are being subjected to are obviously ideological. We are being prevented from examining, questioning, and criticising things that are happening in our communities. I've experienced how cults work. As a young woman, I lived for 4 years in one of New Zealand's most notorious cult communities, Centrepoint Community. Centrepoint ran on principles that came directly from the same postmodernist philosophers, sexologists, and academics that are the foundation of what's now called queer theory. Queer theory teaches that transgressive behaviours are required to dissolve boundaries as the way to make a better world. Some of the boundaries they intend to break down are what defines heteronormative relationships and the conventional family. The way this worked at Centrepoint resulted in undermining the normal instincts of women to avoid behaviours that were harmful to them and their children. In real life, I saw how child safeguarding was dismantled bit by bit so that within a few years, the sexual exploitation of women and children had become normalised. Queer theory is a Trojan horse ideology pretending to be social justice that is a spearhead for malevolent forces that intend to exploit the vulnerability of women and children. If trans ideologues achieve their definition of a social justice utopia by first silencing everybody that doesn't support the belief that men can become women, by threatening people that they will lose their jobs, or by cancelling and deplatforming dissenting voices, when this society is achieved by force, do they imagine it will function with goodwill and trust? Part of what makes democratic societies flourish is that all citizens have equal freedom to speak and discuss how they want their communities to interact. It is through free discourse we identify what are majority and minority views and try to find a way all community members can have their positions respected. Through open discourse, it is communally decided the best way to instigate rules, laws, and codes of conduct to bring about what has been argued through that process of debate to be the fairest outcomes for everybody. So I'm curious to know how it's going to work when a large portion of society is actively prevented to speak freely and punished if they do so. When a significant portion of people have to have their questioning or dissent silenced, it doesn't sound like a social justice utopia to me. It seems more like North Korea, Afghanistan, Mao's China, or Stalin's Russia. Societies that have to force their citizens to shut up about issues they don't want discussed are on the slippery slope to authoritarianism. I ask, where are the people who support transgender ideology, who understand the importance of debate? I'm at a loss to name a single trans rights activist who welcomes debate and engages in serious and good faith argument. WPATH, the international organisation representing trans rights and setting medical standards, does not welcome debate. If their beliefs are solidly anchored in reality and human rights, as they claim, why are they not welcoming debate and confidently outlining what their principles are? After 6 years of researching queer theory and critical social justice activism, I've arrived at the view that the people who embrace the ideology are literally dangerous to child safeguarding, women's rights, free speech, and democracy. Critical social justice ideology does not stand up to deep philosophical and sociological critical evaluation. It is anti-science and rejects reality. I believe it is essentially dogma that provides an intellectual construct enabling aggrieved personalities to act out fears and frustrations against limitations that are almost always entirely imagined. In closing, I want to reiterate this chant from Let Women Speak. There is no such thing as a trans child. Non-binary is not a real thing. Trans women are men. Men do not have vaginas and women do not have penises. Women will never stop fighting for our rights. And thank you very much. I'm concluding.
Thank you, Pearl. I appreciate your time, especially from your sick bed. And now I'd like to pass over to Tania.
Good evening. I went to the IWD Brisbane Meandering Conference in March this year, and I wrote and presented a somewhat mediocre speech where I mentioned that I was one of 5 women organising the Let Women Speak tour of New Zealand. In that speech, I said that we needed Kelly J. We needed to inject some energy into the New Zealand gender critical movement, and that my hope was that this would be a game changer for New Zealand TERFs. My hopes were realised. The Auckland event ended in a riot before any woman was able to say a single word, and the Wellington event had to be cancelled because, as Kelly J's own website said, of a credible threat to life. It was at that moment that it became apparent to everyone that New Zealand women are disrespected, victimised, and remain unheard. Spectators were horrified while watching a bunch of predominantly male trans activists, young ones, screaming, abusing, insulting, harassing, threatening, and ultimately physically assaulting women for having the temerity to speak in public. I spoke on the platform briefly a couple of days after the event and mentioned that one woman had told me she had written a poem and she wanted to read that poem out at the event, and that we got beaten up for wanting to do that. I challenge anyone to see the justice in that. There's been significant support given and received within the gender critical movement, and I am personally grateful for the kindness I received, and I'm indebted to a number of women, and I hope they know who they are. The work and effort that has gone into the subsequent legal initiatives, the pooling together of resources, and the sense of unity that has resulted from Albert Park has been incredibly moving at times. The riot opened eyes for a lot of people, and there has been a substantial growth in numbers in most of the gender critical groups. There's been breakthroughs in media with publications of articles, letters and interviews in mainstream media, which was severely lacking before the events. New groups have been created involving both men and women, and they are growing rapidly. We're building a strong foundation for the work ahead. And there's been the ultimate question asked of our Prime Minister, what is a woman? Which led to a stuttering, bashful, bullshit answer in line with other countries' leaders' answers. And it tells us all we need to know. It's not a surprise that people have opposing views. It's not a surprise that gender critical views are at best misunderstood, at worst a justification for rape and death threats. It's not a surprise that society has created a perfect storm of ideology that panders instead of challenges, oppresses instead of uplifts. But what is a surprise is where the buy-in is situated. Some people don't know the ideas or the layers. Some people don't care, and some people are lacking a depth of knowledge, but are still actively engaged on either side of the debate. And of course, some people are at the epicenter. In terms of the type of people who support gender ideology or who are gender critical, we're looking at a range of demographics. We're looking at a range of life experiences. People who would have historically been on the same side are now on opposing teams. We have parents debating children, teachers debating students, women debating women, feminist against feminist, lesbian against lesbian, gay against lesbian, friend against friend. And worse, we have gender critical against gender critical. Because when human beings feel disenfranchised and disrespected, sometimes they resort to eating their own. So in these instances, we have risk of harm caused by friendly fire, attacks from your own side. We see this played out on Twitter and Facebook all the time. It's not uncommon. I've been in it myself. I haven't won particularly, but I've been in it. As part of the organising of Posey Parker, we had criticism from other gender-critical feminists around the suitability of supporting Posey, around disagreement of her stance, her particular take, which is fairly hardline. There were even some feminists who agreed that she shouldn't have been allowed in the country. After the event in Auckland, our own people started criticising the organisers' abilities, the organisers' actions, and attached blame to the way it had played out. Subsequent weeks showed an undercurrent of bitching and backstabbing, generally demonstrated out of personal grudges and hurt egos. Although I'm strongly of the opinion that some people need to be held to account for their behaviour and attitude, doing so in public and on the net is grandstanding and ultimately self-sabotaging. Friendly fire was evident in my employment. People I thought were my friends were not. People I thought had professional respect for me did not. People who are legally required to ensure I am supported dropped the ball. Just a couple of weeks prior to the Auckland event, one of my work colleagues got her nose out of joint about what I was organising, had a bit of a go about Nazis and bigotry, and then stopped talking to me. She has still not started talking to me again. I took sick leave for a week after the Auckland event because I incurred injuries there. And when I returned to work, some of my work equipment had been damaged while locked away in my personal office. The same day, I was called into a meeting where it was implied that there had been a complaint made about me regarding the gender critical stuff that has since been retracted. An email trail followed, which resulted in me making a formal response outlining the ways that I felt I was working in a hostile environment. These issues haven't been addressed to date. The consequences of the events were personal as well for me. My territory was exposed beyond what it had already been. I've never been particularly shy about it, but I tried hard not to labour a point when talking to friends and acquaintances when I felt too much resistance or when I knew they actively did not share my views. The Albert Park events brought it out into the open, and people I knew struggled with it. I've seen resistance to my stance from friends who aren't involved in this. There's a female socialisation aspect whereby they tolerate my beliefs, accept that they're there, but ultimately blame the victim. There's judgment that I was involved in this, and this is what the consequences were, and therefore, in a way, it's my fault because I was involved. What came out of Albert Park for me was a sense of betrayal that evoked rage. I've worked with the police force in previous jobs. I've considered them on my side when I needed them. They supported my work in court. I've called them when I got caught up in difficult situations. I've sought assistance from them when I've been offended against, and I've never felt as though I could not trust them to do their job, at least with some attempt at professionalism. And I'm speaking as an organisation here. Individual police officers obviously can be problematic, but as an organisation, that's what I expected. When the police failed in their responsibility to attend and keep the peace as they're required, and as they told us they would, and they effectively left a bunch of mostly older women utterly at the mercy of a violent crowd who were intent on causing harm, they betrayed all of New Zealand. They chose not to do their job. They chose not to do it. And really, that is the epitome of friendly fire. We have a significant battle ahead of us. Chanel Lau, for example, who stirred up vitriol and organised the trans activists at Albert Park, has been rewarded with Young New Zealander of the Year, and recently is the face for an anti-bullying campaign, which is laughable and an absolute slap in the face. The media are continuing to walk the narrative, push the propaganda. Groups are being formed and discussions are being had. People are out on the streets. Leaflets are being dropped. Signs are being painted. MPs are being contacted. Letters are being written. Articles are being published. Lawyers are being instructed. Ballot boxes will be ticked. The women are organising. And we need to stay on track, keep the common goal ahead of us, and stay in our respective lanes. I have a renewed commitment to this fight. We have a long way to go, but we're well on our way. I've said it before, that if you're not with me, you're against me, and if you're against me, you're no damn good to me. So my path is clear for me. I know what I need to do. I know how I'll do it. And all I ask is that those who are against me get out of my way because I've got work to do. I may well get taken down again, and I may not be able to get back up next time. But I do assure everyone that I will not get taken down by friendly fire. The end.
Thank you, Tania. That was a tough time. So, without further ado, I would like to hand over to Leah. Leah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good evening to everybody. My name is Leah Whiston, and as mentioned before, I'm a very proud mother to a gorgeous little 1-year-old baby, which is my life. And like every other mother I've met, our babies are the most precious gift in our lives, and we would go to the ends of the earth to protect them. And my daughter is the main reason why I'm speaking out very loudly now about the dangers of gender ideology. So I used to go along with the trans women are women thing. I didn't really give it much thought. I didn't really look much deeper than the mantra. But then when I was at the University of Brighton in 2016, I found myself in a seminar around the topic of girldick. Then I saw how the only lesbian bar left in Brighton suddenly had a man pretending to be a woman, calling himself the landlady. And this is the UK's gay capital. So it really then dawned on me that lesbians don't have a single space to go away from men. And this absolutely infuriated me. And the penny started to drop. People around me were going along with the fallacy that humans can change sex, that a woman can have a penis, and that a child could be born in the wrong body. The first time I agreed with J.K. Rowling, I received my first message from friends in the UK calling me a transphobe. After I spoke about females losing our right to female-only spaces, I received more messages from old friends. Of course men shouldn't be in women's spaces, Leah, but trans women aren't men. I've been called homophobic. I've been compared to the homophobes of the 80s and 90s, been called every name under the sun for this. Other friends have slipped away over time because of my firm position that women and children deserve dignity, privacy and safety in our spaces away from men, no matter how they identify, no ifs or buts. And children should never be put on a path to experimental, hormonal and surgical procedures for being gender non-conforming, whatever that means. I see myself in these children. As a tomboy, I never felt like a girl, I never wanted a baby until my 30s. And as a teenager, the thought of being pregnant repulsed me. I didn't see it in my life. I was bullied relentlessly at secondary school, and I know that if I was born 20 years later, my life would be very different. If I had the chance to make the bullying stop, along with the sheer embarrassment and trauma of female puberty, by taking a medication and receiving instant adoration from a community, I'd have done it in an absolute heartbeat. I might not have breasts today or a womb. I might not have my baby. I might not have ever known the sheer joy of what it means to be a mother. And this is being stolen from our girls. Decisions made in their teenage years, removing the opportunity for them to ever know the wonder of what it means to be a mum. Some friends don't really want to engage with me when I mention that in Queensland, a person can change their documents and be legally recognised as the opposite sex in law. This means any man can gain access to women-only spaces and services such as changing rooms, toilets, hospital wards, prisons, rape crisis centres, breastfeeding groups, sports teams, the list goes on. The situation for women's sex-based rights and children's safeguarding in Australia and New Zealand is very worrying. There are a growing group of women who are alert to the changes being quietly made, but there are many, many people who, although they've heard rumblings around gender ideology, they really have no idea about the legal changes that are happening. Laws that are being changed quietly are stripping away the hard-earned rights of women and children. It's really happening. People just don't seem to believe it. Queensland's Birth, Deaths and Marriages Registration Bill 2022 repeals and replaces the existing acts. One of the key objectives in the bill is to, quote, strengthen the legal recognition of trans and gender diverse people, end quote. In other words, the proposed changes to the bill will allow anyone to falsify their official documentation, sex marker, and therefore be legally recognised as the opposite sex in law. No checks, no medical diagnosis, it's simply a matter of self-declaration, and everybody is forced to just go along with that. I, along with many other women across Queensland, instantly recognised the huge danger that allowing men to identify into our spaces would present to women and children, and we presented submissions to the parliamentary hearing for the proposed changes to the Act. The committee asked for further evidence that women and children are at a greater risk of physical and sexual abuse from men, and that men might use the policy change for nefarious reasons. Rachel Wong, CEO of Women's Forum Australia, and Sal Grover, the founder of female-only app Giggle, are two women who presented the case against amendments to the Births, Deaths and Marriages Bill. The committee argued that they couldn't envisage that predatory men might use the sex self-ID to access women and children's spaces. So, the women immediately put together an extensive list of reams and reams of evidence where this has precisely happened. For example, you've probably heard of Adam Graham, otherwise known as Isla Bryson, the Scottish man who raped two women and changed his gender identity before trial. He was then housed in a women's prison and only moved because of the public outcry from our Scottish sisters. Darren Marrigal was reported to have exposed her penis in a female-only changing room at We Spa in Los Angeles. When the women complained, they were called transphobic. He was later arrested and found to be a sex offender. Peter Selby is a man who says he's transgender, convicted paedophile with over 125,000 child sexual abuse images, who was spared jail because the judge said he wouldn't cope in a men's prison. And here in Brisbane, Vitia Joseph Bunton is a man who was found in possession of child sexual abuse material of boys aged 5 and 16 years old. He used gender identity as a way of receiving a lesser sentence. The judge believed he had acquired the child abuse images out of curiosity at a time when he was struggling with his transgender and sexual identity. Rachel and Sal's list of evidence is in response to the hearing committee alleging that they couldn't find any evidence of men exploiting sex self-ID. The examples they found are only examples that could be easily found online, so the cases that the government have access to could be significantly higher. In a sane society, one example would be enough to put a stop to this absurdity. The Queensland Attorney General and Minister for Women is the woman responsible for making these changes. Women have not been consulted. Our comments and evidence have been totally ignored. I personally know of numerous women across Queensland who have been blocked from communicating with Shannon Fentiman, MP, for simply raising concerns for the impact that this will have, and currently having, on women's rights and children's safeguarding. She calls us transphobic for not wanting penises in ours and our children's spaces. She calls us hateful for saying that trans women are men, which they are. A quick search on Pornhub or any other porn website will bring up thousands and thousands of videos of a growing genre of porn of men masturbating in women's spaces. This is a fetish, and it's a fetish that requires the compliance of women. The media in Australia is completely captured by gender ideology and rarely reports on the damage being done by it. Children who pursue social transitioning, like changes of pronouns and name, who inevitably will go on to be pushed down to medicalisation and unnecessary barbaric procedures with extremely dangerous complications, are celebrated and encouraged by Australian media. Girls suffering from mental illness are coerced into procedures that promise they will turn her into a boy and endure irreversible damage like wrong sex hormones, double mastectomy and phalloplasty, which is a procedure where the forearm is skinned, totally skinned. The skin of the forearm is then rolled up and stitched onto her groin to give her something resembling a penis, which of course will never function as a penis. Their previously perfectly healthy genitals butchered beyond repair. And if you even dare question this, you're called a bigot, transphobic and a TERF. For too long, women have felt compelled to remain silent. When speaking about the reality and truth, like humans can't change sex, the fact that sex is the main factor in the oppression of women and girls worldwide, and the absurdity of transitioning children, women usually face punishment. Online harassment, income loss, social outcasting are all extremely powerful forces at play when getting us to just shut the fuck up, but we won't. I recently phoned the local swimming pool where I take my daughter, and I asked them if when sex self-ID comes into effect, will they be able to guarantee no men in our female spaces? They couldn't. I grew up with the right to privacy and safety in my spaces without the worry of seeing men in them. And if I did, the social expectation would have been to tell him to get the fuck out, with the support from the other women in that space. The rights I took for granted are slipping away. Now, we're called all sorts of names for saying men can never be women, or questioning the insane ideology. And this is a whole new world for our daughters. I, along with many other concerned women, mothers, grandmothers, daughters, was one of the organisers of Kelly J. Keen's Standing for Women tour of Australia. We hoped this tour would start conversations across this part of the world where the media has so far been totally silent, but we didn't quite expect the level of government collusion that occurred, designed to frighten and intimidate us. It was completely surreal to see so-called Nazis ushered in to appear like they were somehow part of the event in Melbourne. The people attending and organising the Let Women Speak events were continuously smeared by the Australian government and media as literal Nazis. We watched in disgust when Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews lifted the pride flag above Parliament just days after trans rights activists held violent attacks on women for daring to speak in public about our rights. It was unbelievable to witness the level of violence and aggression from men aimed at the brave women who came to speak and support. We watched in horror as the New Zealand event descended into chaos before it even began, as Kelly J. Keen and others were physically assaulted. A 70-year-old woman was repeatedly punched in the face by a man who cracked her skull, all while the New Zealand police stood by and did nothing to protect them. Shannon Fentiman and Anastasia Palaszczuk proposed tougher hate crimes and serious vilification laws for Queensland. They say, quote, "We have already taken steps to work towards introducing new hate laws to make it a criminal offence to display hate symbols to evoke fear in others. Prohibited symbols that might cause a member of the public to feel offended are prohibited," end quote. And it's clear to see which direction this offence would be punished. I feel offended when men pretending to be women infiltrate mine and my daughter's spaces and services. Will my offence be recognised? And who decides what constitutes a hate symbol? Will it be illegal for me to wear my adult human female t-shirt outside? This is an absolute attack on free speech, an attempt to silence women who say, no, I will not accept any man as a woman, no matter how he identifies, and it is not my job to validate someone else's identity. They say, quote, "This government is committed to a Queensland that is harmonious, fair and inclusive, not one where individuals or groups are vilified based on their race, religion, language, ethnicity, nationality, sexual orientation or gender," end quote. Notice how the sex category is missing. Gender identity now trumps sex in Queensland. Sal Grover, a new mother, is facing a court case from a middle-aged man called Jason Roxy Tickle because he was rejected from joining her female app, Giggle. The Tickle versus Giggle case highlights the conflict between women's rights and gender identity, with implications far beyond the app. It could affect women-only spaces like prisons, toilets and sports in Australia and determine whether women and girls deserve to get access to these spaces away from men. The fact that a case has been filed against a woman for rejecting a man's request to join her female-only app is infuriating. Women and men across the world are supporting Sal as she battles to safeguard sex-based rights and the safety of all women and girls in this landmark case. The success of this case could lead to the removal of gender identity from the Sex Discrimination Act and defining women as adult human females in law, ensuring that female-only spaces, services and sports are exclusively for females and that nobody should be compelled to include men in these spaces. Now I organise regular Speakers Corner events with other women in Brisbane. I've met so many people doing this along the way who I'd probably never have met. Although I have lost friends over speaking out, what I've gained is far more. I've met women from all walks of life. We don't have to watch our speech or police our language around each other. We leave every other issue at the door We are together and we are committed to fight for women's rights, child safeguarding and free speech for however long it takes. Our next Speakers Corner is in Parliament, outside Parliament in Brisbane on Sunday the 7th at 12:30, and I hope all of you come along. Thank you.
Thank you, Leah. It's a frightening landscape. Okay, well, I would like to thank our three speakers for tonight, Pearl Moon, Tania Sturt, Leah Whiston. We've had some absolutely hot, heavy, hard, difficult stuff to talk about tonight. So I'm looking forward to hearing question time and further discussion and how women can offer help and what suggestions you can make for us to move past this really difficult stuff.